The outcast among giants. Jake Murphy wiped the sweat from his forehead as he hunched over his microscope in the cramped laboratory aboard the Stellar Dawn. The research vessel hummed quietly through the void of space, carrying its diverse crew of aliens and one solitary human toward the uncharted regions beyond known civilization. 3 months had passed since Jake joined this expedition, and each day blurred into the next: work in isolation, eat alone, and endure the constant ridicule from his crewmates. The ship itself was a marvel of engineering, with corridors wide enough to accommodate even the largest species aboard. Yet Jake always felt diminished walking through these vast hallways, dwarfed by beings that towered over him. Most of the alien crew stood at least 7 feet tall, some much larger. The Corac warriors were particularly imposing, dark green scales rippling over powerful muscles, razor-sharp teeth that gleamed when they smiled. Jake had learned quickly that a Corac's smile rarely meant friendship. "Look what crawls out of its hole," rumbled a deep voice behind him. Jake didn't need to turn around. He recognized Grunon's voice, one of the younger Corac warriors who stood nearly 8 feet tall and never missed an opportunity to demonstrate his superiority. Grunon particularly enjoyed reminding Jake of humanity's perceived weaknesses. Jake continued examining his plant sample, a delicate specimen with tiny blue flowers that seemed to emit their own ethereal glow. He was trying to understand the bioluminescent mechanism when Grunon stepped closer, his shadow falling across the workstation. "I asked you a question, softkin," Grunon growled, using the derogatory nickname he'd coined for Jake. Several other Corac warriors chuckled from the doorway, gathering to watch their entertainment unfold. Jake finally looked up. "I'm analyzing the plant samples from yesterday's surface expedition. Captain Czar wants a comprehensive report by tomorrow." "Plant samples," Grunon repeated mockingly, raising his voice to a falsetto. "How crucial, the mighty human studies flowers while real warriors explore dangerous worlds." The other Coracs erupted in laughter. "These plants could be toxic," Jake said quietly. "If we understand their properties, we can protect the crew from potential hazards." "Safe." Grunon spat contemptuously. "You humans are obsessed with safety. That's why you're weak. That's why you need artificial atmospheres to breathe on most worlds. That's why you can't lift anything substantial or fight creatures larger than small mammals." Jake had endured this lecture countless times. He turned back to his microscope. "I need to complete this analysis." "You need to finish this work," Grunon mimicked in his exaggerated weak voice. "Perhaps you should request assistance from someone strong enough to lift that tiny plant." The warriors laughed again before finally departing, leaving Jake alone with his shame and determination. This daily harassment had become routine. The Corac warriors, especially the younger ones, seemed to consider tormenting Jake their primary entertainment. They called him Softkin, Tiny One, and the Pet Human. They mocked his need for environmental suits on most planets, ridiculed his processed food rations compared to their raw meat diet, and constantly joked about his modest height of 5'6" among crew members who averaged over 7 feet. Jake tried to ignore their cruelty, but it wore on him. He had dedicated 10 years of his life to earn this position, studying xenobiology, mastering 6 alien languages, training in survival techniques. When Earth finally received an invitation to join an interstellar research mission, Jake was selected as one of only 3 human candidates. He had dreamed of exploring new worlds, studying alien life forms, making discoveries that would bridge understanding between species. The reality proved far lonelier than his fantasies. Jake completed his analysis of the plant sample and documented his findings. The specimen was indeed highly toxic, containing a unique poison unlike anything in their extensive databases. Ingestion would cause severe neurological damage. Small amounts would cause illness, larger quantities could prove fatal. He wrote detailed identification protocols and safety warnings, knowing his work might save lives even if no one acknowledged his contributions. As he worked, Jake became aware of a presence in the doorway. He looked up to see Vexer, and his breath caught slightly. Vexer was different from the other Corac warriors. Ancient by their standards, his scales were darker and marked with countless battle scars. He stood nearly 9 feet tall with muscles that dwarfed even his younger compatriots. But the most striking difference lay in his eyes. While the younger warriors possessed bright yellow eyes full of aggression and energy, Vexor's were deep gold, seeming to hold centuries of wisdom and experience. Unlike the others, Vexor never participated in Jake's humiliation. He never laughed at the jokes or used cruel nicknames. He simply observed. Jake had attempted conversation several times, but Vexor rarely spoke to anyone. When he did, his voice was so deep and commanding that the entire ship seemed to pause and listen. "The plant is dangerous," Jake said, uncertain if Vexor was interested but feeling compelled to share his findings. Vexor stepped into the laboratory, his massive frame making the space feel claustrophobic. "How dangerous?" he asked, his voice like distant thunder. Jake was startled. This was the first direct question Vexor had ever posed to him. "Extremely dangerous. The toxin attacks the nervous system. A small piece could cause severe illness. A larger amount could be lethal." Vexor nodded slowly, processing this information. "The others collected many samples of this plant today," he said finally. Jake felt his heart race with alarm. "They did? Are they planning to consume them?" "Some of the younger warriors wish to sample the local flora," Vexor replied. "They believe it will enhance their strength." Jake leaped from his chair. "I have to warn them, this could kill them." He started toward the door, but Vexor didn't move aside. Jake stopped, looking up at the towering warrior. For a moment, they stared at each other in silence. Jake wondered if Vexor would prevent him from helping the same warriors who tormented him daily. Perhaps the ancient warrior thought Jake should let them learn through painful experience. Then Vexor stepped aside. "Go," he said simply. Jake ran. The poisonous truth. Jake sprinted through the corridors of the stellar dawn, his footsteps echoing off the metallic walls. He had to find Grunon and his group before they made a potentially fatal mistake. He discovered them in the main dining area, gathered around a table laden with various plant specimens from their recent planetary expedition. Jake recognized some as harmless, others he hadn't yet analyzed, but prominently displayed in the center sat a large pile of the toxic blue flowers. "Stop!" Jake called out as he burst into the room, breathing heavily. "Don't eat those blue flowers, they're poisonous." Grunon looked up with his characteristic predatory grin. "Look who wants to join us. The softkin wants to eat real food instead of his human paste." "I'm serious," Jake gasped, still catching his breath from his sprint. "Those blue flowers will make you severely ill. They could kill you." "Kill us?" Grunon laughed, the sound rumbling through his chest. "Little human, we are Corac warriors. We have stomachs of iron. We can digest things that would destroy most species." "Not these," Jake insisted desperately. "I just finished analyzing them. The toxin is unlike anything in our databases. Please, don't eat them." Grunon picked up one of the blue flowers, holding it up to examine it in the light. "You know what I think, softkin? I think you're jealous that we can consume things you cannot. I think you want us to be as fragile as humans." "That's not true," Jake protested. "I'm trying to help you." "Help us?" Grunon stood, towering over Jake menacingly. "When have humans ever helped anyone? You're the weakest species in known space. You can't survive on most planets without artificial support. You can't fight, you can't lift substantial weight. What could you possibly do to help real warriors?" Jake felt his face flush with embarrassment and frustration, but he forced himself to remain calm. "I can study and analyze things. That's how I know these flowers are dangerous." Grunon brought the flower close to his mouth, opening it wide to display his razor-sharp teeth. "I'll demonstrate exactly how dangerous they are." "Please," Jake said quietly, his voice barely above a whisper. "I'm asking you as a fellow crew member, don't eat that flower." For a moment, Grunon hesitated. The other warriors around the table watched in silence, tension filling the air. Then Grunon's lips curled into his sharp-toothed smile. "Fellow crew member. You're not our fellow anything, softkin. You're cargo, a pet that Earth sent along to make themselves feel significant." He bit down on the flower with a dramatic crunch. Jake watched in horror as Grunon chewed and swallowed. The other warriors cheered and began selecting their own flowers, caught up in the moment of defiance. Jake knew the timeline, approximately 10 minutes before the toxin would begin affecting their systems, 20 minutes before severe symptoms manifested. If they consumed enough flowers, some might not survive. He turned and ran toward the medical bay, hoping to find something that could counteract the poison when it inevitably took effect. Behind him, he heard the warriors laughing and making jokes about the scared little human, but their laughter wouldn't last long. In the medical bay, Jake frantically searched through bottles and containers, his hands trembling as he looked for anything that might help with toxin exposure. The ship's medical computer was designed primarily for alien physiology, but Jake had studied it extensively during his first weeks aboard. He understood that most universal antidotes worked by cleansing the bloodstream and supporting nervous system function. 15 minutes had passed since Grunon consumed the flower. Jake mixed a solution that should theoretically help, though he wasn't certain it would be effective on Corac biology. Grabbing the medical kit, he raced back toward the dining area. When he arrived, chaos greeted him. Grunon lay on the floor, his body convulsing violently while green foam spilled from his mouth. Two other warriors clutched their stomachs, making agonized sounds Jake had never heard before. A third had collapsed from his chair and couldn't stand. The remaining warriors stood around helplessly, their earlier bravado replaced by panic. "Move away," Jake commanded, dropping to his knees beside Grunon. "I need to help him." "Get away from him, human," one warrior shouted. "You did this, you poisoned him somehow." "I tried to warn you," Jake said, pulling out his medical equipment. "The flowers were toxic. I told you not to eat them." Jake worked quickly, checking Grunon's pulse and respiration. The warrior's heart was racing dangerously fast, and his breathing was shallow and labored. Jake prepared an injection designed to slow the toxin's progress, though he'd never used it on a Corac before. "What are you doing?" another warrior demanded suspiciously. "Trying to save his life," Jake replied, pushing the needle through Grunon's thick scales. It was difficult, but he managed to deliver the medicine into the bloodstream. More crew members arrived, including Captain Czar, a wise elder from the aquatic Moran species. The captain's normally blue skin turned pale when he saw the stricken warriors. "What happened here?" Captain Czar asked, his voice heavy with authority. "The warriors consumed toxic plants," Jake explained while moving to check the second afflicted warrior. "I warned them of the danger, but they didn't listen. I'm attempting to treat them now." Captain Czar observed as Jake moved methodically from one sick warrior to another, administering medicine and monitoring their vital signs. "Can you save them?" the captain asked. "I don't know," Jake answered honestly. "The toxin is extremely potent. If I had reached them sooner, perhaps, but they consumed large quantities." For the next 2 hours, Jake worked without rest. He administered treatments, monitored breathing, tracked heart rates. Slowly, very slowly, the warriors began to improve. The convulsions stopped, the green foam disappeared, their breathing normalized. Grunon was the last to regain consciousness. When he opened his eyes, he found Jake sitting beside him, still monitoring his pulse. What happened?" Grunon asked weakly. "You ate poisonous flowers," Jake said simply. "You've been unconscious for 3 hours, but you'll recover now." Grunon tried to sit up, but Jake gently pressed him back down. "Rest. The toxin is neutralized, but your body is still weak." You helped me," Grunon said, confusion evident in his voice. "Yes," Jake replied simply. "But we always." Grunon couldn't finish his sentence. "You always mock me," Jake said calmly. I know. But you're still a crew member. We work on the same ship. I couldn't let you die. Grunon stared at Jake for a long moment, then closed his eyes in what might have been shame. The other warriors who had witnessed Jake save their friends looked uncomfortable. They whispered among themselves, but Jake couldn't hear their words. Something had changed that day, though Jake wasn't sure what it meant for his future aboard the Stellar Dawn. The jungle world. 3 days after the poisoning incident, the Stellar Dawn arrived at Kepler 442c, a lush jungle world shrouded in mystery. Dense forests stretched across continents, filled with strange creatures and plant life that no sentient species had ever studied. The planet's thick atmosphere glowed with an amber hue, and multiple moons cast shifting shadows across its surface. Captain Czar gathered the crew in the main briefing room, his aquatic features reflecting the excitement of discovery. We'll divide into teams to explore different regions of the planet, he announced, consulting his data pad. Each team will focus on specific research objectives. Jake expected to be assigned alone, as usual. He had prepared for solo fieldwork, gathering his equipment and environmental suit. Jake Murphy, Captain Czar called out, reading from his assignment list. You will work with Vexer to study the northern forest ecosystem. Jake felt a surge of surprise. He looked around the room until he spotted Vexer standing near the back, the massive warrior giving him a subtle nod of acknowledgement. Several other warriors whispered among themselves, their expressions unreadable. Jake wondered what this partnership might mean. Was it punishment for Vexer, or recognition of Jake's competence after saving the poisoned warriors? As the teams prepared for departure, Jake gathered his research equipment, specimen containers, analysis tools, environmental scanners, and his portable microscope. His human environmental suit felt bulky compared to the minimal gear the other species required, but it was necessary for survival. Vexer approached Jake's preparation station, carrying what appeared to be standard Corac expedition gear, which meant very little beyond weapons and basic survival tools. Ready? Vexer asked, his deep voice resonating through Jake's chest. Yes, Jake replied, adjusting his equipment pack. I've prepared sampling containers for plant specimens, water analysis, and soil samples. My scanners should be able to detect most forms of biological activity. Vexer nodded approvingly. Good. The northern forest has unusual energy readings. Something lives there that our sensors cannot identify. As they boarded their assigned shuttle, Jake felt a mixture of nervousness and excitement. This was his first time working directly with another crew member, especially one as respected as Vexer. The shuttle was designed for larger species, so Jake felt like a child sitting in the oversized seats, but Vexer's presence was oddly comforting rather than intimidating. The descent through Kepler 442c's atmosphere was spectacular. The jungle canopy stretched endlessly in all directions, broken only by winding rivers that gleamed like silver threads. Strange bird-like creatures with iridescent feathers soared between the trees, and Jake caught glimpses of larger creatures moving through the undergrowth. Their shuttle landed in a small clearing near the edge of the northern forest. The moment the doors opened, Jake was struck by the planet's alien beauty. The air was thick and humid, filled with exotic scents, some pleasant like tropical flowers, others sharp and unfamiliar. His environmental suit's filters worked overtime to process the atmosphere. Breathable for you? Vexer asked, noticing Jake's equipment. The oxygen levels are adequate, but there are trace compounds I can't identify, Jake replied, checking his readings. Better to be cautious until I can analyze the atmospheric composition. Vexer grunted approvingly. Wise. They began their trek into the forest, Vexer moving with surprising grace for his size, while Jake documented everything he observed. The trees were massive, their trunks twisted in spiral patterns that seemed to pulse with bioluminescent veins. Flowers bloomed in impossible colors, deep purples that shifted to silver, blues that seemed to contain stars. Remarkable, Jake murmured, taking samples of various plants. The genetic diversity here is unprecedented. These species evolved in complete isolation. Vexer watched Jake work with interest, occasionally asking questions about his findings. Unlike the younger warriors, Vexer seemed genuinely curious about the scientific process. "How do you know which plants are dangerous?" Vexer asked as Jake carefully collected a specimen with crystalline leaves. "Training, mostly," Jake replied, sealing the sample in a containment unit. "But also pattern recognition. Plants with unusual colors, strange textures, or odd growth patterns often produce defensive compounds. This one has crystal formations that suggest mineral absorption, possibly to concentrate toxins." "You saved the others with this knowledge," Vexer observed. Jake paused in his work. "I did what anyone would do." "No," Vexer said firmly. "You did what a protector would do. Despite their treatment of you." They continued deeper into the forest, following what appeared to be an animal trail. Jake's scanners began detecting increasingly unusual readings, energy signatures that didn't match any known biological patterns. "Vexer," Jake said, studying his scanner display. "I'm getting some strange readings ahead. The energy patterns are unlike anything in our databases." Vexer's hand moved instinctively to his weapon. "Dangerous?" "I'm not sure. The readings are complex. Almost like they're artificially generated, but there's no evidence of technology." They approached the source cautiously, pushing through hanging vines and oversized ferns. The readings grew stronger with each step, until they emerged into a circular clearing where the impossible awaited them. In the center of the clearing stood a grove of trees unlike anything Jake had ever seen. Their bark was smooth and silver, pulsing with rhythmic patterns of light that resembled a heartbeat. The trees were connected by visible energy streams, threads of pure light that flowed between them like luminous veins. "By the ancestors," Vexer breathed, his usual composure shaken. Jake's scanners were registering readings that defied his understanding of biology. "These trees, they're not just connected. They're communicating. The energy patterns suggest a form of consciousness." "Living network," Vexer said, understanding immediately. "More than that," Jake whispered, watching the light patterns shift and change. "I think they're trying to communicate with us." As if responding to his words, the light patterns in the trees began to change, becoming more rhythmic, more purposeful. The entire grove pulsed in unison, creating a pattern that was undeniably intentional. Jake felt a moment of profound awe, followed by the realization that they had discovered something extraordinary, something that would change everything humanity understood about consciousness and intelligence in the universe. But as he prepared to document this incredible find, he heard something that made his blood run cold, the sound of approaching footsteps, and voices he recognized all too well. Grunon and his warriors were heading their way, and Jake had a terrible feeling that this discovery was about to become much more complicated. "The network awakens." The voices grew louder as Grunon's team pushed through the jungle undergrowth. Jake felt his heart sink. He had hoped for more time to study the remarkable tree network before other crew members arrived. "Stay calm," Vexer said quietly, his golden eyes fixed on the pulsing trees. "Document what you can." Jake quickly activated his recording equipment, capturing as much data as possible about the light patterns and energy signatures. The trees seemed to sense the approaching presence of more beings, their pulsing growing more rapid and intense. Grunon burst into the clearing first, followed by 3 other young Corac warriors. They stopped abruptly when they saw the grove of silver trees, their expressions shifting from curiosity to something approaching greed. "What is this place?" Grunon demanded, his eyes reflecting the pulsing lights. "We're still analyzing it," Jake replied carefully. "The trees appear to be some form of connected organism, possibly sentient." "Sentient trees?" one of the other warriors scoffed. "Everything is sentient to you humans. You probably think rocks have feelings too." But Grunon was studying the light patterns more intently. "Those lights, they're moving in patterns. Like they're responding to us." Jake nodded. "Exactly. The energy readings suggest complex neural activity. These trees might represent the most sophisticated biological network ever discovered. Network? Grunon's eyes lit up with a different kind of interest. You mean they're connected? Like a computer system? More like a brain, Jake said. But organic, evolved over possibly millions of years. Vexor had remained silent, but Jake noticed his posture had shifted slightly, subtle preparation for potential conflict. The ancient warrior's instincts were clearly alerting him to danger. If they're like a computer, Grunon said slowly, then they might contain information. Knowledge about this planet, maybe other worlds. Possibly, Jake agreed cautiously. But we need to study them carefully first. Any interference could damage. Or we could just take what we need, Grunon interrupted, drawing his weapon, a high-energy blade designed for cutting through dense materials. No. Jake stepped forward instinctively. We don't know how interconnected they are. Damaging one tree could kill the entire network. And why should we care? Grunon challenged. If they have valuable information, it belongs to whoever can claim it. That's the law of strength. That's not how science works, Jake protested. This could be first contact with a completely new form of intelligence. We have protocols. Your protocols, Grunon spat. Human weakness disguised as wisdom. He raised his blade toward the nearest tree, but before he could strike, Vexor's massive hand closed around his wrist. Stop, Vexor commanded, his voice carrying the authority of age and experience. Grunon looked shocked. Vexor? Why do you protect the human's foolishness? I protect wisdom from stupidity, Vexor replied calmly. The human speaks truth. This requires study, not destruction. Since when do you care about study? Grunon demanded, trying to pull his arm free from Vexor's grip. You're a warrior, not a scholar. A warrior learns, or a warrior dies, Vexor said. The human's learning saved your life 3 days ago. The reminder of the poisoning incident clearly stung. Grunon's face darkened with embarrassment and anger. That was different, he growled. No, Vexor said firmly. That was exactly the same. Knowledge protects. Ignorance destroys. As they argued, Jake noticed the tree's light patterns were becoming more agitated, pulsing faster and brighter. His scanners were detecting increasing energy levels throughout the network. Everyone needs to step back, Jake said urgently. The network is responding to our conflict. Energy levels are spiking. But Grunon wasn't listening. In a sudden burst of strength, he broke free from Vexor's grip and lunged toward the nearest tree with his blade raised. What happened next changed everything Jake thought he knew about the universe. The tree's bark suddenly shifted, becoming fluid like mercury. Tendrils of living silver wrapped around Grunon's blade, stopping it inches from the trunk. But instead of attacking, the tree did something unprecedented, it began to communicate. Images flooded into their minds, visions of the planet's history, the evolution of the tree network, the development of their collective consciousness over eons. Jake saw the network's purpose, not just survival, but the preservation and sharing of knowledge across generations. The trees were librarians of biological information, storing the genetic memories of every species that had ever existed on this world. They were peaceful, curious, and desperately lonely, the first intelligent visitors they had encountered in millions of years. But the visions also contained a warning. The network was fragile, dependent on the delicate balance of the entire forest ecosystem. Damage to even one tree would disrupt connections that had taken millennia to establish. When the visions faded, all the warriors stood in stunned silence. Even Grunon had lowered his weapon, his expression transformed by what he had experienced. They showed us their history, one of the younger warriors whispered in awe. They're not just trees, another added. They're guardians. Protectors of knowledge. Jake felt tears behind his environmental suit's visor. The beauty and sadness of the network's loneliness was overwhelming. They've been waiting, he said softly. Waiting for someone to understand them. Vexor stepped closer to Jake, his golden eyes reflecting new respect. Your caution saved them, he said. Your wisdom protected something irreplaceable. Grunon looked at his blade, then at Jake, then at the gently pulsing trees. For the first time since Jake had known him, the young warrior looked genuinely humble. I almost destroyed something ancient, Grunon said quietly. Something that trusted us enough to share its memories. But you didn't, Jake replied. That's what matters. The network pulsed once more, this time in what could only be described as gratitude. The light patterns were peaceful now, welcoming rather than defensive. We need to return to the ship, Vexor said. Captain Czar must know about this discovery. As they prepared to leave the clearing, Grunon approached Jake hesitantly. Human, he began, then corrected himself. Jake. I owe you an apology. More than one. Jake looked up at the towering warrior. You don't owe me anything. Yes, I do, Grunon insisted. I've been wrong about you. About humans. About what makes someone strong. He extended his hand, a gesture of respect among Corac warriors. Jake took it, feeling the warrior's genuine remorse and newfound respect. Strength isn't just physical, Grunon continued. It's also having the courage to protect others, even when they don't deserve it. Even when they've treated you badly. As they began their journey back to the shuttle, Jake realized that something fundamental had changed. Not just in how the others saw him, but in how he saw himself. He was no longer the isolated human enduring mockery. He was part of something larger, a crew that was beginning to understand the true meaning of strength. Brothers among the stars. The return journey to the stellar dawn was unlike anything Jake had experienced in his months aboard the research vessel. Instead of walking alone while others ignored him, he found himself at the center of animated discussions about the tree network's implications for xenobiology and consciousness studies. Grunon, who had once mocked Jake's scientific work, now peppered him with questions about neural networks and collective intelligence. The other young warriors listened intently as Jake explained the theoretical frameworks that might help them understand what they had witnessed. So the trees aren't just connected, one warrior said thoughtfully. They're actually sharing thoughts. More like sharing experiences and memories, Jake replied. Each tree maintains its individual identity while contributing to the collective knowledge base. It's similar to how individual neurons function within a brain, but on a massive scale. Fascinating, Vexor rumbled, his deep voice carrying newfound appreciation. In our warrior traditions, we speak of the battle bond, the connection between warriors who have fought together. Perhaps these trees have achieved something similar, but with knowledge instead of combat. When they reached the shuttle, Jake carefully secured the samples and data he had collected. The discovery would revolutionize several fields of study, but more importantly, it had changed the dynamics of his relationship with the crew. As they lifted off from Kepler 442's surface, Jake watched the jungle canopy recede below them, knowing that the tree network was still down there, pulsing with ancient wisdom and newfound hope. They were no longer alone in the universe. Back aboard the Stellar Dawn, Captain Czar convened an emergency briefing to hear about the discovery. The main conference room filled with crew members from various species, all eager to learn about the first confirmed sentient plant network in recorded galactic history. Jake presented his findings with growing confidence, no longer the isolated human struggling for respect. His data was comprehensive, his analysis thorough, and his conclusions groundbreaking. When he finished, the room erupted in questions and excited discussions. The implications for our understanding of consciousness are staggering, Dr. Ilex, the ship's xenopsychologist, commented. If plant networks can achieve sentience, we need to reconsider our entire approach to first contact protocols. The archaeological possibilities alone could keep research teams busy for decades, added Chief Archaeologist Morvan. A living repository of planetary history, it's unprecedented. Captain Czar raised his hand for silence. This discovery will indeed change many things. But I want to commend the team that made it possible. his aquatic eyes fixed on Jake. Mr. Murphy's caution and scientific methodology prevented what could have been a catastrophic loss of irreplaceable knowledge. Applause filled the room, but Jake felt the most meaningful acknowledgement came from Vexor's subtle nod of approval and Grunon's respectful smile. After the briefing, as crew members dispersed to discuss the implications of the discovery, Grunon approached Jake in the corridor. "I wanted to speak with you privately," the young warrior said, his usual arrogance replaced by genuine humility. They found a quiet observation deck where stars wheeled slowly past the viewport. For a moment, both stood in comfortable silence, watching the cosmic display. "I've been thinking about what the trees showed us," Grunon said finally. "About patience, and wisdom, and protecting things that are precious." He paused, struggling with words. "I've been cruel to you, Jake. Not just teasing, cruel. And stupid." Jake started to speak, but Grunon held up a hand. "Let me finish. I thought strength meant dominating others, proving superiority through force. But you've shown me a different kind of strength. The strength to help those who hurt you. The strength to protect knowledge instead of seizing it. The strength to remain true to your principles even when others mock them." Grunon turned to face Jake directly. "In Corac tradition, when a warrior recognizes another's true strength, we offer the battle bond. It means we will stand together, fight together, and protect each other as brothers." The young warrior extended both hands, palms up, a gesture Jake recognized as one of the most solemn rituals in Corac culture. "I would be honored to call you brother, Jake Murphy. If you can forgive my blindness." Jake felt emotions welling up that he hadn't experienced since leaving Earth. For months, he had endured isolation and mockery, wondering if he truly belonged among these incredible beings exploring the galaxy's mysteries. Now, one of his former tormentors was offering him brotherhood. He placed his hands on Grunon's palms. "I would be honored, Grunon. Brothers among the stars." The ritual was simple but profound. As their hands touched, Jake felt the weight of loneliness lifting from his shoulders. He was no longer alone in the vast darkness between worlds. Over the following weeks, word of Jake's discovery and his growing acceptance among the crew spread throughout the ship. The dynamic shifted gradually but noticeably. Conversations that had once excluded him now welcomed his input. Crew members began seeking his expertise on biological samples, and even species he had never worked with before started approaching him with scientific questions. The change was most apparent in the dining hall. Where Jake had once sat alone, pushing processed human food around his plate while enduring stares and whispers, he now found himself at tables surrounded by animated discussions about xenobiology, planetary ecosystems, and the philosophical implications of plant consciousness. Vexor, who had remained mostly silent during Jake's months of isolation, began sharing stories of his own experiences exploring unknown worlds. His tales of ancient civilizations and extinct species fascinated Jake, while Jake's scientific insights helped Vexor understand phenomena he had observed but couldn't explain. On Corvax Prime, Vexor said one evening as they studied stellar charts together, "I encountered crystalline formations that sang in harmonious frequencies. I dismissed it as unusual geology." "Harmonic resonance in crystal matrices," Jake mused. "Could have been a form of mineral-based communication. Did the patterns change when you approached?" "Yes," Vexor replied thoughtfully. "The frequencies shifted, became more complex." "Then you may have witnessed another form of non-biological intelligence," Jake said excitedly. "We should request a return expedition to study them properly." These conversations became regular occurrences, with Jake and Vexor forming an unlikely but effective partnership. The ancient warrior's vast experience combined with Jake's scientific knowledge proved invaluable for understanding the strange phenomena they encountered on their journey through uncharted space. Grunon, too, had become a different being entirely. The arrogant young warrior who had once tormented Jake was now his most protective ally. When crew members from other ships they encountered made disparaging remarks about humans, Grunon was the first to defend Jake's contributions to their mission. The human has saved lives and made discoveries that will be remembered long after we're all dust, Grunon would declare fiercely. Any who question his worth question the judgment of the stellar dawn herself. 6 months after the discovery on Kepler 442c, the ship received new orders from the Galactic Research Consortium. They were to investigate reports of unusual energy signatures near the Andromeda border, a region where few expeditions had ventured and even fewer had returned. As the crew prepared for this dangerous new mission, Captain Czar called Jake to his private quarters. "Mr. Murphy," the captain began, his blue skin reflecting the soft light of his aquarium walls, "I have a proposition for you." Jake listened as Captain Czar explained that the consortium had been impressed by his work, particularly his handling of the tree network discovery. They were offering him command of his own research vessel, with a hand-picked crew and unlimited resources to explore the galaxy's biological mysteries. "It's an incredible opportunity," Captain Czar said. "Your own ship, your own mission parameters. Many scientists would consider it the opportunity of a lifetime." Jake was quiet for a long moment, processing the offer. Command of his own vessel, freedom to pursue his research without interference, recognition as a leading xenobiologist, everything he had dreamed of when he first left Earth. "I'm honored by the offer," Jake said finally. "But I need to ask, what would happen to the Stellar Dawn? To this crew?" Captain Czar looked puzzled. "They would continue their mission, of course." "Why do you ask?" Jake thought about Vexor's quiet wisdom, Grunon's transformation from tormentor to brother, the countless conversations with crew members who had come to value his insights. He thought about the tree network, still pulsing with ancient knowledge on Kepler 442c, and how the discovery had been made possible not by his skills alone, but by the teamwork and trust he had built with his companions. "Captain," Jake said, "I appreciate the offer, but I respectfully decline. My place is here, with this crew. We've become something more than just colleagues, we've become family. And family doesn't abandon each other for personal glory." Captain Czar studied Jake's face for several moments, then smiled, a rare expression for the typically stoic Moran. "I thought you might say that," the captain said. "It's one of the reasons I recommended you for the position in the first place. A leader who chooses loyalty over ambition is rare in any species." That evening, Jake stood in the observation deck where he and Grunon had performed their brotherhood ritual. The stars wheeled slowly past the viewport, each point of light representing worlds they might explore, mysteries they might solve, dangers they might face. Vexor joined him at the viewport, his massive presence somehow comforting rather than intimidating. "You turned down the command position," Vexor said. "It wasn't a question." "How did you know about that?" Jake asked. "Captain Czar sought my counsel about your potential response," Vexor replied. "I told him you would choose brotherhood over advancement. Was I right to refuse?" Jake asked. "It was everything I thought I wanted when I first joined this expedition." Vexor was quiet for a long moment, his golden eyes reflecting the starlight. "Among my people," he said finally, "we have an ancient saying, the warrior who fights alone may win battles, but the warrior who fights with brothers wins wars. You have found your brothers, Jake Murphy. That is worth more than any title or command." As if summoned by their conversation, Grunon appeared in the doorway, followed by several other crew members Jake had come to consider friends. They gathered at the viewport, a diverse collection of beings from across the galaxy, united by their shared purpose and mutual respect. "So," Grunon said with a grin, "I heard you turn down your own ship to stay with us misfits." "Best decision I ever made," Jake replied, feeling the truth of those words in his bones. "Good," Grunon said, clapping Jake on the back with enough force to stagger him. "Because we have a dangerous mission ahead, and we'll need our best scientists to keep us alive." "Our brother," Vexor corrected, his deep voice carrying approval and affection. "Our brother," the others echoed, and Jake felt his chest swell with pride and belonging. As the stellar dawn adjusted course toward the Andromeda border and whatever mysteries awaited them there, Jake Murphy, no longer the isolated human enduring mockery, but a valued member of an interstellar family, stood surrounded by beings who had become more precious to him than any personal achievement could ever be. The galaxy was vast and full of wonders yet to be discovered. But Jake had already found the greatest treasure of all, a place where he belonged, among brothers who would stand with him against whatever darkness lay between the stars. In the cosmic distances ahead, ancient signals pulsed with promises of new discoveries, new challenges, and new opportunities to prove that strength came not from standing alone, but from standing together. The lonely human had found his home among the stars, and his real adventures were just beginning. The end.